Hello, I'm Dr. Tam Cummings, and I'm a gerontologist specializing in dementia. This is number 3 of a 6-part series on dementia caregiver education by the East Texas Alzheimer's Alliance. This is What is Memory? Now, as you're working with your loved one and as you're learning about dementia during this series, you also got to remember things that happen to people with dementia. So people with dementia develop delirium, and you need to understand the difference between the two. Delirium has a rapid onset and change in behaviors for your loved one. Dementias are slow-moving, slow-progressing diseases. Now, vascular dementia can be different. Remember, there are multiple forms of vascular dementia, but one of the forms can be that your person had a stroke, and that started the dementia. So for most families, they're going to see dementia as a slow-moving, slow-progressing disease. But when families can say, you know what, she was fine until August 18th, something happened in her brain on August 18th. And the only thing that could happen in that amount of time would be typically some type of stroke activity. Otherwise, dementias are slow-moving, slow-progressing diseases, whereas delirium has a rapid onset. Delirium is dangerous. Delirium means that the brain no longer recognizes the brain chemistry, which means the brain can shut the body down. That's why we react so quickly. That's why your loved one goes out 911. They are either suddenly lethargic, they will have sudden outbursts of anger, either physically or verbally, or they will have a mixture of the two. If your loved one has a sudden onset of agitation, confusion, much different than they normally are, that would be hyper. If they're difficult to rouse, difficult to waken, this is not normal for them. And even though you fed them, they fell asleep over their food, that is hypo. If you're seeing a mixture of the two behaviors, it is mixed. It can be caused by a number of things: surgery, drugs, dehydration, low sodium, low blood sugar, high blood sugar, pain causes delirium, infection causes delirium, dementia, dehydration, anesthesia cause delirium. Delirium comes on quickly. The person, and that's your clue, is that your loved one is completely different than what is normal for them. They're agitated, they're restless. You may even see slurred speech. And after your loved one is released from the hospital, remember, delirium isn't necessarily cleared up in a hospital visit. If the person continues to just not be the same, remember, delirium can last for weeks or months, and don't be afraid to go back and say, are we actually cleared on delirium? Because my loved one's symptoms are still there. And just advocate for them. The doctor's going to go and take a second look. People with dementia have depression, and the form of the depression that they have is called atypical depression. People with atypical depression are angry, annoyed, agitated, and aggressive. Now, I either described your colleagues at work, your boss at work, or your loved one, or all of the above, which is the most popular answer. But if your loved one is angry, annoyed, agitated, and aggressive, you want to talk to the doctor about an antidepressant and not an antipsychotic. Your loved one shouldn't be getting an antipsychotic. Those are dangerous for people with dementia. Instead, it's an antidepressant. People with dementia are not pretending. They're simply not aware they have dementia. It's called a nausea. Now, that doesn't mean that your loved one won't say, I have Lewy bodies. That doesn't mean your loved one won't say, I've been told I have MCI. It doesn't mean they won't say, I've been told I have Alzheimer's. But they don't understand what that means. They don't recognize or understand that their behaviors are not normal for them. They don't understand why you're correcting them, arguing with them, or pointing out what they've done wrong. Those are things you've got to stop doing. Best family caregiver I've ever met is a woman who, for reasons, I don't know where she learned this, she simply does not argue with whatever her mother says, no matter how outrageous it is, no matter how painful it can be. This caregiver's father died a few years ago, and it became evident then how sick her mother was, and there really, I don't think, was a chance to truly grieve her father before she had to immediately become a caregiver for her mother. And she amazingly does not argue, does not correct, does not point out, does not engage negatively with her loved one. If her mother says, "Where's my vehicle?" Her vehicle's getting an oil change. She'll go check on it. If her mother says, "Where's my husband? Where's your dad?" He's back at work. She is a marvel at not arguing. And that is one of the big things we do. And it's human instinct to do it, but you've got to stop. These are not children with growing brains that we need to correct and help their brain understand. These are our loved ones with dying brains. And we have to take on the extra care because their brain can't do it anymore. They're not doing it on purpose. And I realize it feels like that. They're not doing it on purpose, and they're really not aware they're doing anything wrong. There are things we can do with people with dementia, things we cannot do. Their reality is our reality. If my mother thinks it's 1970 and I keep trying to insist what year it really is, all I'm going to do is scare her, agitate her, and it's cruel. She has brain damage. I can't imagine waking up and suddenly realizing everybody around me is telling me that 50 years of my life have gone by. How come I don't remember that? And that would scare you to death. And it does the same thing to people with dementia. So their reality is your reality. You have the 3-pound brain. You're the one that can change. We use empathy. We are not lying to people. If I tell you something that's not true, I'm lying to you. You're right. I'm a 3-pound brain telling a 3-pound brain something's not true. Your loved one has brain damage. They are no longer part of the conversation about care because they can't be. They have the equivalency of an 8-year-old, a 12-year-old, a 14-year-old. They're no longer part of the care decision plan making. You're going to do that for them out of your love. You're going to pick the right thing because of your love and your care. We're not lying to them. We're using empathy. These people have brain damage. The brain runs the body. As the brain becomes more and more damaged, the body will work less and less efficiently. You simply won't see it until stage 6 of the disease. I see it in your loved one in stage 5, but it's because that's what I do. There are things that you cannot do to people with dementia, and this is critical that you teach your families to do this, that you make sure caregivers do this. Stop quizzing the person with dementia. This is something we do to people with brain damage, and we don't do it to anybody else with any kind of disease, but we do it to people with brain damage. Have you ever been at a party and someone came up and said, "Hey, do you remember me?" Except you didn't. Do you remember how you begin to get really tight inside and you begin to get embarrassed? You got a little flustered. You were a little annoyed with yourself that you couldn't remember this person's name. And all of those emotions are very close to anger. You may have even gotten angry that you didn't know this person's name. People with dementia can do that. And so what happens is families come into the person with dementia and they get right in their face and they demand, and their voice has an edge to it. "Tell me who I am. You know who I am. Tell me who I am." And I understand that your family member thinks this is helpful. This will make them use their brain and then they'll be different. No, this is cruel. This upsets and agitates your loved one. It sets off their adrenaline and it can make them upset for 24 hours. We do not do this to people with dementia. And when you think about it, it's ludicrous. If you ever knew a person with COPD, COPD means chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder or disease. It means that the person's lungs don't work effectively, efficiently, they don't work correctly, and the person can't take in oxygen. Not enough oxygen, body doesn't use it right, lungs don't work right. Their families do not come up to them and demand they blow up balloons to prove their lungs still work. In fact, if somebody did that, we'd probably call to get them arrested. If you see a person whose legs have been amputated, their family doesn't come up to them and demand they get up on those little stubs and run down that hallway because you used to do it. The family looks at them and recognizes their legs are gone. Your loved one has brain damage. They're doing the best they can in every moment with the brain that is still functioning. The correct way to address your loved one is to approach from the front, to bring your face down to the level where their face is. Not up in their face, but at a 3-foot space, the way you would with anybody else you're talking to. And then you say to them, "I am Tam. I am your daughter. I'm your favorite. I'm the good looking one. I'm the smart one. You always liked me best." I'm giving that person information but I am not going to make them prove to me their brain doesn't work, because that's just simply wrong. When you come visit your loved one, you visit with them, you tell them who you are. They're not pretending not to know you. This is not revenge because you came in late in high school. They have brain damage. You and I don't. We have to change and do better for the person who's got the injuries to their brain. So what is memory exactly? Memory is your ability to retrieve, recall, and store information. Memory comes in three forms. There is long-term memory, also called lifetime memory, short-term memory, and sensory memory. Sensory memory is what you learned when you were a child and your mom said, don't touch that, it's hot. And you didn't know what hot was, so you touched it. You found out what hot was. You never had to touch anything else again when somebody said, oh, that's hot. That's sensory memory. Long-term memory is divided into procedural, episodic, declarative, and semantic. And those are the different forms of memory that we have. Short-term memory is that memory that works really only for a few minutes or a few seconds. Think about driving down the highway. Short-term memory is going, oh, watch out for that red car. That red car's coming up too fast. Oh, that truck's pulling over in front of you. Oh my gosh, there's a cop up there, cop up there, cop up there. Oh, wait, here's our exit. Move over, move over. Watch that car, watch that car. And when you get home, you realize you didn't remember the cop. You get home and don't even remember if you stopped at the stop signs in your neighborhood. That's short-term memory working with procedural memory, because procedural memory is that memory that told you to stop at the stop sign, look both ways, and then go. Long-term memory is the memory that began to be formed in the moment of birth. Long-term memory is divided into declarative memory. That's the memory of like things you learned at school. Procedural memory includes your activities of daily living, motor skills, things that you and I do automatically. And let me give you a idea about what that is. Procedural memory is your ADLs. So if I looked at one of you right now and said, hey, your shoe's untied, you don't think, let me take a string and make a rabbit ear, and let me take another string and make a rabbit ear, and let me cross a rabbit ear over a rabbit ear and pull it through a rabbit hole, and ooh, I tied a shoe. You simply tie your shoe. Because of procedural memory, you never realize all the steps it's taking to do the activities of daily living. And you're not grabbing sometimes that your loved one is losing bits and pieces of those steps. And that tells us that procedural memory is affected. Semantic memory is memories that it doesn't have to do with things personally. This is numbers, words, meanings, facts. Episodic memories are memories where the memory has a lot of emotion associated with it. So this might be your memory of Christmas morning on your best Christmas morning. It might be a memory of your favorite holiday that you had, a wedding that you went to, a vacation that you went on. Episodic memories tend to have a lot of emotion with that event, and that emotion is part of what makes that memory so very strong. Now, as you try to put all this together, because you want to be able to explain this to others and help them and understand what's happening with your loved one, think about every memory you have as being a file. Think about your brain being the file cabinet. But think about every memory you have as a file, and let's just look at a couple of memories. Think about driving. Some of you learned to drive when you were little kids. You grew up on a ranch, so I learned to drive when I was 4. Some of you learned to drive when you were 15, 16, 17. It's going to be harder to get the keys away from me because my memories of keys are deeper than the memories of somebody who started driving when they were 15 and 16 versus the memories of somebody who may have grown up in New York City and not learned to drive until they were 30 or even older. Some of you have files on driving that include driving in rain, driving in snow, driving in ice. Some of you have files on how to drive in mud. Some of you have files on how to drive a stick shift, 3 on the tree, 4 on the floor, something that uses a clutch. Some of you have files on how to drive a tractor trailer, a pickup truck hauling a trailer of cattle. Some of you have files on how to drive a tractor, how to drive a lawnmower. That's much different than the files of somebody who lives in New York City who's never actually driven anything. Some of you have very organized files. Some of you, the files don't seem to be that organized. And what I love about this file is each one of these files has the name of a person on it. And I think of this as a woman and these are her kids' files. And I don't know what poor Ron has done to her, but Ron's got a voodoo doll with a pin in it in his file. So I feel bad for Ron. As we think about files, families will go, but how come she didn't know that, but then she knew it again? It's because there's not one simple file. Let's look at two words. One of the words is banana. Banana is one of the first foods that you and I ate. It's one of the first foods we actually got handed to eat once we passed food that was pureed in a jar. We learned that bananas came in their own carrier. We learned that there was a color like bananas. Then you learned that somebody could actually be bananas. They could go bananas. You learned that monkeys like bananas. When I was growing up, there was also a TV show with a group of guys called the Monkeys, and they acted like they were bananas. There's a color called banana yellow. There's a part on a bicycle, a specific bicycle that's called a banana seat. You can do all kinds of things with bananas. In the cartoons, you can throw a banana peel and make somebody fall down. You can cook with bananas. I put sourdough bread in here just because it's COVID and everybody's making sourdough bread. It doesn't really have anything to do with bananas. But think about all the different files you actually have banana in. Now think about all the files you have the word mama in. There's a lot of files and a lot of connections. And even though part of the files are gone or destroyed, there's still connections to other files that still have some of that information in it. So think of every memory as a file. Think of your brain as the file cabinet. Memory started in your moment of birth. Now, as I go through this, I'm going to use my mother as the explanation of memory to help you understand what's happening to your loved one, and hopefully this will make sense. My mother was born at home on what is now Fort Hood, Texas. My mother was the only child until she was 6, and she got a set of twin sisters. But my mother comes from a large family. She had 63 first cousins. My mother did all the things that your mother did. She learned family connections, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins. She learned social skills. She actually had social skills beginning to be taught to her on the day she was born. If you were born male, your hand was shook. If you were born female, somebody shook your hand. By the time you were just a few days old, somebody was holding you up and waving goodbye when someone came to visit you. My mother learned her activities of daily living. She learned her spiritual and her religious beliefs. She began to learn the social conversation around the age of 2. And around the age of 2, she also began to say, yes, sir, and no, sir. Yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am. Please and thank you. And she started the conversation of, hi, how are you? Oh, I'm fine. How are you? That is the social conversation. It is not a sign of cognition. It is old memory that goes back almost to the beginning of that person's life. My mother began to learn singing. She began to learn cursing. They sent her to school. My mother walked 2 miles through a pasture called Copperhead Hill, climbed over a barbed wire fence, walked 2 miles down a dirt road, got picked up and taken to a one-room schoolhouse. Sometimes caregivers see our elderly and they think they have dementia. They're not strong, and they don't realize these people are very strong. And the reason is they walked 8 miles a day going to school. In the evening, my mother was dropped off. She walked 2 miles home down the dirt road, climbed over the barbed wire fence, walked 2 miles home through Copperhead Hill. And of course, if we tried to do that today with a child, the sheriff would be there to arrest us when we got there. My mother learned reading, writing, and arithmetic. She learned an awful lot of ball games, musical instrument. She learned, she had her first kiss and her first love. She played point guard as basketball. She was a cheerleader. She was the homecoming queen. And the day after she graduated high school, she married my father. By the time my mother was 30, she and my father had 5 children, and I am 10. From those 5 children, my mother has 12 living grandchildren, and from the first 7 of those living grandchildren, my mother now has 20 great-grandchildren, and number 21 is due in 6 weeks. And with the arrival of the grandchildren and the great-grandchildren, families begin to notice something is wrong with their loved one's memory. Now, memory is going to go backwards in a backwards fashion in most forms of dementia. But if your loved one has a vascular dementia, the vascular dementia, even though your loved one may have been a professional piano player, if the stroke killed the files on piano, I can put you at a piano all day long and your loved one doesn't know what they're supposed to do with it anymore because the stroke killed that whole set of files. Otherwise, memory is going to be removed in the reverse order it was learned. Now, there's some unusual things that happened in 2007, and these affect your loved one. In 2007, we began to get iPhones. And in 2007, flat screen TVs became affordable, and everybody had a remote control. It is not at all unusual that a person with dementia will come up to their family or to their caregiver or to the nurse, hand them their cell phone and say, "There's something wrong with my television. This won't turn it on." In the same breath, they may come back and hand the nurse their remote control and say, "There is something wrong with my phone. It won't call my daughter." They're not doing this to be annoying. This is agnosia, the inability to recognize and use common objects. And because these are objects that were learned in 2007, my mother no longer recognizes them because it's not 2007 in what's left of her brain. Your loved one may need to use a walker, and physical therapist or other people may tell you, well, she's refusing to use her walker. He refuses to do it. He pretends he doesn't see it. The reality is he doesn't see it, and it's difficult to learn how to use a walker because the hippocampus in the brain is dying. And if the hippocampus doesn't function, it doesn't matter how many times you hand me this thing and tell me to use it, my brain doesn't have the memory of what you're trying to tell me to do. The file doesn't exist. Also, my mother didn't grow up seeing a walker. Walkers weren't commonplace. I'm not even sure they were invented until the 60s. But my mother knows what a cane is. The reason she knows the cane is because she saw a cane with her grandparents. So she understands cane, but not walker. Your loved one is not refusing to do physical therapy. Physical therapist doesn't understand your loved one has brain damage and can't learn how to do this thing. If your loved one is able to use a walker, and remember, a walker is telling them to lift and put something in front of them and then walk into it, holding their arms in a certain way. And this is not how human beings walk. So these are new movements to learn. If your loved one is able to use a walker, you'll realize they don't call it walker. They call it a buggy. And the reason they're able to learn it has to do with, as a child, they had a doll buggy, and that doll buggy is very similar to what a walker is. So dementia has now begun, and we've noticed these things in my mother. So I go to my mother and I say, "I'm your daughter." And my mother says, "You can't be. You're too old." But my mother knows she knows me. So when I ask her, "What year is it?" my mother tells me the year is 1970. 1970 means I'm only 10 years old. So my mother, it's not that she's being mean to me. My mother doesn't have files on me after the age of 10. And so my mother doesn't know me. She will instead put me in the file of the person I most closely resemble. So to my mother, I am actually her mother. And that's who she thinks I am. And if you knew my family history, you would know that at 60, I'm the age of my grandmother when my mother was 30. And you would know that I favor that grandmother a great deal. My mother doesn't recognize my 85-year-old father as her husband anymore. She instead thinks that's a grandfather that's living in her house. And my mother thinks my brother, who looks like my father and has the same name as my father, but is much closer in age to where my mother believes she is, she actually thinks my brother must be her husband. And for her children, it's not her adult children, and it's not her grandchildren. Her youngest grandchild's a sophomore in high school. The next one is a freshman in college, and then the rest of them are out of college and out in the world. So it's not the grandchildren that she thinks are her children. It's her great-grandchildren, because there's that group meets the timeline of the files she has on her children. And all of the extra people, her adult children, her grandchildren, all of the extra great-grandchildren, my mother had 63 first cousins, including a set of double cousins. My mother just thinks there's a bunch of cousins around her. The disease never stops. Dementia kills brain cells every moment of every day. Your loved one is worse tonight than they were this morning. There is less brain structure. The disease progresses, and I say to my mother, "I'm your daughter," and my mother says, "I'm sorry, I've never been married. I don't have children." That means that I can't talk about being her kid anymore, and I can't tell her the great-grandchildren are her children because my mother's now somewhere in school. Now, that means I can still have a great conversation with her. I have to respect her file cabinet. My mother grew up on a ranch. My mother played point guard. I can talk to her about playing basketball, being a cheerleader, what school was like, how to milk a cow, how to make preserves, how to make bread, how to make butter. I can have a great conversation with anyone with dementia as long as I respect where they are in their file cabinet. And as the disease progresses, my mother begins to want to go home. When she's getting ready to go home, some of you have heard, I want to go home, I want to go home, that you finally thought, oh, they mean the home they were born in. And you loaded them up and you drove them to that place. And when you got there, your loved one said, that's not my home, because that's not what home is. Now, some of you are being shadowed. Being shadowed means you can't move a step without your loved one attached to you. If you're being shadowed, it means that your stress levels are even higher than another dementia caregiver stress levels would be. And this does not mean undying love. This means that your loved one's dementia is very pronounced, and they're now treating you as though you were their mother, as though you were their father. And if you think about it as a parent, you realize you saw this same behavior in one of your children that you just couldn't peel off of you, but you still had to send them to school, so you still had to peel them off. Your loved one is going to require medical care as a result of this disease. And because you take them to a memory care community or a nursing home, doesn't mean you don't love them. It means that you're getting the best care you can for them, because you can't do the level of care required. And if the person is shadowing you on top of all the care required, then your health is in a very risky place, and we need you to take care of that. When you think about it's time to move your loved one, that can be really, really scary. So let's just stop for a minute and take one deep breath. Put both feet on the floor, hands up, shut your eyes. We're going to breathe into 4, hold for 2, and breathe out to 6. Deep breath in, 2, 3, 4, hold, hold, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These are actually the things that make home home. When you think about what do I do to make that place in that community feel like home to my loved one, this is it. Your pillow is important to you. And everybody has their own type of pillow. Institutional pillows used in medical facilities are actually flat pieces of foam that have been coated in rubber so they can be sanitized. And I can promise, I don't want to sleep on one. You don't want to sleep on one. My mother told me once she'd drive 600 miles if it meant getting home to her own pillow. Everybody has their pillow. Your pillow may be foam, it may be down, it may be feather, it may be gel. Your pillow may be cotton. You may like soft, you may like medium, you may like firm. You may have a new pillow that's for side sleepers. You may have a pillow for people that sleep on their back. Your pillow needs to go with your loved one, because pillows tell us we're home. The next thing that makes home home is your sheets, the texture of sheets, the kind of sheets you like. Are they linen sheets? Are they cotton sheets? Are they satin sheets? Are they silk sheets? Are they bamboo? What color of sheets do you like? I don't like white sheets. I never have. I grew up with colored sheets. Every hotel I go to has got white sheets. I never feel comfortable. They're the wrong texture. They're the wrong color. The weight and feel of your bedclothes tell you you're home. At home, I set my temperature on 67 at night. That is the optimal sleeping temperature for human beings. I have 2 quilts from my grandmother and a comforter on my bed. I have this thickness, 4 inches thick of covers. When I travel, I stay at nice hotels, but their bed covers are only about 1 inch thick. So right away, I don't have my pillow. The sheets are wrong color and the wrong texture, and the bed covers don't weigh the right amount. The next thing that tells you your home is your chair. Because of where I live in Central Texas, I sometimes may not get in until 4 in the morning. And as tired as I am, every single time I sit in my chair before I go to bed. Your art tells you you're home. Think about the last time you moved. You had the boxes unpacked, the bathrooms were done, the beds were made, the kitchen was done, the closets were put away, but you didn't call that place home until you hung your art on the wall. When you hung your art on the wall, you went, oh yeah, kids, we're home now. Your art tells you you're home. Home is your family photos. I don't have pictures of you in my house. I have pictures of all those little great nieces and nephews, my nieces and nephews, my brothers and sisters, my family, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. I have family photos tell me I'm home. And the final thing that makes home home is a smell. And I don't know that smell, and you don't know that smell, but you know your loved one's favorite perfume or cologne. And you bring that, and Throughout the day, we spritz that on the lamp in the room and turn that lamp on, and that room will take on that odor that your loved one enjoyed. And those 7 things are the things that make us feel like we're at home. Also, remember that your loved one might need a body pillow. This is a generation of people, they didn't all have their own rooms, their own bedrooms. They shared beds. And many of them went from a shared bed with siblings to a shared bed with a spouse, and then spent years and decades with that person. And now, maybe for the first time ever, there's no one warm in the bed next to them. So a bed pillow is something that you might think about adding for your loved one to snuggle up against too at night. As you think about your loved one, remember, our brain is functioning. We don't have a brain disease. We are aging normally. Diseases or dementia are diseases of aging, but they're not normal aging. Most of us will not develop dementia of any kind. But for your loved one, think about how different their world is. Before that flat screen TV was a great big cabinet TV, and before that great big cabinet TV was a much smaller TV, and before that TV was the original TV, which was in a cabinet like a radio and had a 9-inch round screen. You had 3 channels, ABC, NBC, and CBS, and they went off at night and came back on in the morning. If the signal got fuzzy, mama sent you to do the rabbit ears, or mama sent you out to do the antenna. Before the television, families had radios that they shared as a place together at night and enjoy each other's company. Before the radio, families had their Bibles, their spiritual books, the books that they read as part of their entertainment. Look at how different it is for your loved one now. Which phone are they actually looking for? And it wouldn't be at all unusual that some of you may have a person who literally started with that candlestick phone and lived long enough to go through all of these sets. Your loved one's not going to recognize that cell phone as the disease progresses because it doesn't look like any phone we've ever had. They're not trying to be difficult. It's just a very complex thing. Their world doesn't look the same. The things that are now normal to you and me are not there. My grandmother started washing by actually having to do what's in these pictures, boiling clothes over water drawn from a creek, and they had gone down to the creek in a wagon drawn by horses. Clothes were scrubbed on a rub board with lye soap. Wash was done on Monday. Monday across the US was wash day. Then there was the introduction of the wringer washer. And I can tell you, if you're ever stuck for a conversation in a person with dementia, ask them what they know about a wringer washer. You'll be amazed at how many people touched that thing where grandmothers and mothers said, do not put your fingers here. People did it anyway. And then finally to today's washers and dryers, which don't look anything at all. Your loved one may not be washing their clothes because they no longer have the files that contain the information on our washers and dryers. And bathrooms are a challenge. Our country didn't have indoor plumbing across the entire US until 1974. People didn't necessarily grow up with indoor plumbing. My mother's family didn't have indoor plumbing until my mother was a senior in high school. And you should know that when they brought plumbing into your house, we stood in the street and we looked at your house as this was going on and we said, how nasty they are. They're going to do that in the house where they eat and sleep. And now that we all have indoor plumbing, we see outhouses and we go, ooh, how nasty. Can we go somewhere else? People didn't grow up necessarily having a clawfoot tub or giant showers. Those things didn't necessarily exist where your loved one might have been. Instead, bath time might have been Saturday night in a number 5 wash tub. And that's much different than what today's bathrooms look like. You and I see bathrooms and it's procedural memory, and we don't realize the dozens of steps it takes. We don't realize that we have memories that that's what a bathroom looks like. Your loved one doesn't necessarily have that. The way the neurons work, and you have 100 billion neurons or nerve cells in your brain. Your 100 billion neurons have 400 billion glial cells assisting them. Your brain, which weighs 3 pounds, has 100,000 miles of blood vessels in it. We could actually take the blood vessels out of your brain and wrap them around the equator 4 times and have some left over. So your brain is extremely complex. And remember, words are not just in one file. Banana's in dozens of files. Mom is in thousands of files. So for the brain to function, the neuron gathers an electrical signal and the neurotransmitter, and it sends the charge, which fires the transmitter down the dendrites. The dendrites are the roots of the nerve cells. As the neurotransmitter fires down the dendrites, it then reaches the axons. It jumps out of the axons across a space called a synapse, and the next bunch of axons pick it up and run it up the dendrite to that neuron. And that chain reaction happening with 1,000,000 billion brain cells equals a thought and equals a movement. In people with dementia, tau protein, which should be in the dendrites of the neurons and should fold out to hold the root structure straight and steady while the cell fires the electrical impulse in the neurotransmitter. For reasons that are not understood, tau protein begins to fold incorrectly. This causes the neurofibrillary tangle. That means that the brain cell cannot take in nutrition, so the brain cell slowly starves, it dies, and it's removed from the body and waste. At the same time, and it's not understood which one triggers which one, or are they even triggers of each other, APOE4 proteins begin to break apart and they form into an actual bone plaque. The blood-brain barrier is now compromised. At night, when you and I reach deep sleep, our brain cells actually shrivel and our brain washes itself clean of all the broken things from the day, neurons that have naturally died and are being replaced, cells that have broken apart, bits and pieces of proteins. It cleans itself. It also cleans out toxin produced by grieving. In people with dementia, their blood-brain barrier is beginning to be compromised because of the disease. And if your loved one has dementia plus diabetes, then their blood-brain barrier is even more compromised. And so the toxins eventually have more and more difficulty cleaning and washing out of the brain. If you get a good night's sleep, that's why you wake up feeling so refreshed and so sharp and ready to go, is because your brain cleaned itself really well last night. Your loved one's brain begins to not really be able to do that. The dark brown red areas are neurofibrillary tangles. So those are neurons that are now tangled and being destroyed. The blue areas are APOE4 protein that is broken and has become a bone plaque. On the left is the normal brain. On the right, it is an Alzheimer's brain. Everywhere you see dark color in the Alzheimer's brain, that is now fluid and not brain tissue. The Alzheimer's brain has lost 1 pound of brain tissue at this point. That is a stage 6 brain. Remember, your loved one's not going to respond well to anesthesia. And the easiest way to help your families understand the neurological process and what happens in a brain that has dementia where anesthesia surgery has occurred is puddles and potholes. So think of your loved one's brain being a street full of potholes. When it finishes raining, water stands and makes puddles in the potholes. When your loved one's brain has anesthetic surgery, it's believed it doesn't clear all of the anesthesia because of the potholes that are now in the brain. And that's just the easiest way to visualize it. After anesthetic surgery, it's not unusual that a person with dementia could lose half of a stage or even an entire stage as the result of anesthesia. That's why your physician may want to talk to you about different ways to do surgery. They may want to try to use a block or some other method, or they may say this surgery isn't severe enough for us to need to do this because the outcome from the anesthesia would be more dangerous. So those are questions to ask your physician if surgery is planned. Now let's just take a deep breath in, feet on the floor, hands in the lap. 1 deep breath in, eyes shut, deep breath, 1, 2, 3, 4, hold, hold, breathe out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Take a deep breath and you'll be fine. Keep learning everything you can about dementia. The next part of our series is going to be the 9 most common forms of dementia and their subsets. And this should give you a lot of information on the next thing you would do for your loved one.